Hey there, everyone. This is Bradley Jackson with the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Tennessee Manufacturers Association. And I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time today, November 24th, right before Thanksgiving gets upon us, for our last manufacturing show. I do want to acknowledge our staff and the great work that they've done throughout these events. I know putting together just the programs and the coordination of everything virtually can somewhat be a challenge, but I'm proud that we've been able to pull it off. For many of you, you all remember the Tennessee Chamber typically each year goes out in the field all across the state to different manufacturing facilities and host these road shows. However, due to the recent pandemic, this year we moved them all virtually, and this will be our third and final one. I do want to thank our sponsors who your support really helps to make all this happen. TVA, our presenting sponsor, Innovative Consulting Group, Toyota Tennessee, Elliott Davis, Lee Company, Aetna, First American, and Bridgestone. Thank you all so much for your support of our Manufacturing Roadshow series. So as I mentioned, this is our third series. The first one on November 10th we held really focused on technology and automation. Our goal with these series are to hit on different important topics that are impacting the manufacturing community, especially during the pandemic. On November 17th, we focused on supply chain and pandemic response. And today we're going to take a heavy look forward and try to anticipate what can manufacturers expect with the changing political climate and with the pandemic. So we've got a great lineup of speakers today. Just to briefly recap, manufacturing in the volunteer state, manufacturing is a substantial industry. Tennessee often ranks as one of really the top 10 states in terms of our economic activity with manufacturing. Manufacturing employs over 350,000 Tennesseans, really making it the second largest private sector employment group. In addition, manufacturing wages, average out in Tennessee, the data we see from NAM, about $70,000 a year, which is well above the average for non-farm wages in Tennessee, which averages about $44,000. There are over 5,000 manufacturers across the state. Most of them are under 100. And the most prominent manufacturing sectors is, of course, first of all, automotive manufacturing. Then we move to chemical manufacturing, food and beverage, and tobacco manufacturing, as well as paper manufacturing and appliance manufacturing, and of course, chemicals, which makes really our top 6-7 manufacturing sectors. So with that said, we will dive right in, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker today, and that's Dr. Tim Graeff with Middle Tennessee State University. He is a professor of marketing, director of the Office of Consumer Research in the Jones College of Business at MTSU. Along with his publications in leading marketing journals, he also serves on the editorial review board of Marketing, Education Review, and Psychology and Marketing. Many of you know that the Tennessee Chamber has a longstanding partnership with MTSU where we work to distribute out their, I believe it's their quarterly business leader survey that gauges really how the business community feels, what are their expectations, what do they believe the future looks like. And so, Dr. Graeff, we're thrilled to have you today to provide an update, which is crucial to manufacturing, business leaders' perceptions and what maybe the future holds for a number of issues. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. Let me tell you the most recent information that we have. We are planning to conduct some more consumer surveys in the beginning of December, but I'll tell you what results we have of the most recent surveys and what that might mean. Okay, so first, we let you know that the Office of Consumer Research at MTSU, we do two major types of surveys. We conduct the one that Bradley just mentioned, what we call the Tennessee Business Barometer Survey. And that is a survey of business leaders. We do that in partnership with the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We do that 4 times a year, January, April, July, and October. It consists of the core set of 17 different questions, measuring their perceptions of the current economy, the future of economy, their individual business, their firm, what they think they can expect for their firm, and also employment questions about, are you planning to increase or decrease employment? We also, so that measures the kind of the business leader side of it, the production side. The consumption side, we do our Tennessee Consumer Outlook surveys. We also do those 4 times a year, and we stagger them with the business barometer surveys. The consumer surveys, we survey, every time we do them, we survey at least 600 people. We try to get at least 200 from West Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, and East Tennessee. We do surveys where we ask a core set of 11 questions about the current economy, what they expect the economy to do, and is now a good time or bad time to make large purchases, which would be relevant to folks in manufacturing to get a sense if consumers are thinking about buying things. Now, both of these surveys, they measure outlook or confidence. They're measuring perceptions, we're measuring attitudes. And as a result, you can consider these, any kind of consumer confidence, consumer outlook survey as a leading indicator versus a lagging indicator. Now, a lagging indicator would be something like GDP, something like inflation, something like unemployment, where it's telling us what happened in the past. So it's lagging. We don't get the GDP numbers for a month or two later. So it kind of lags behind what was actually happening. These surveys we do, we consider them as leading indicators because if you are feeling good about the economy, business leaders and consumers, you tend to spend money, you tend to invest in your business, you tend to increase capacity, you tend to hire people. Consumers tend to go out and spend money, they buy cars, they build decks on their houses, they put in new flooring, they spend the money. So when they are feeling good, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because when they're feeling good about the economy, both business leaders and consumers, they act in a way that actually causes the economy to do well, to grow. And the same thing also holds true. If they think the economy is going to go down, decline, they stop spending money, which then causes the economy to decline. So that's why it would be important for manufacturers to know this, because it gives you a sense of what might be happening in the future or where people are thinking. Here are the results from the business barometer surveys. And I know it's kind of a big chart, but I'll show you from 2015 up into our most recent survey, October of 20. These are the results. If you look at the overall index measure, that's just that blue circle at the top. And then we've got the different little sub-indice components below it. And you can see after the 2016 election, we saw a nice increase in outlook and confidence among business leaders. It kind of, bounced around a little bit. In October of 19, we saw a pretty decent kind of decline. We had some issues. People were concerned about tariffs, trade issues, dealing with other countries. Those concerns seem to have gotten resolved back in January of 20, but then COVID hit. And you can see that sharp decline in people's perceptions and responses to our survey in April. But then the thing you need to notice is that we've got this very nice V-shaped, I guess you can call it just like a recovery in the economy, but it's a recovery in optimism, outlook, and perceptions of the economy. And in fact, if you look at the overall index number, the future expectations index number, and the employment index number, those are actually higher than they were the same time back in October of last year. So it's actually kind of amazing that we went through all this year, and some of our index measures are actually higher than what they were the same time last year. But the key I would want to point out is that green diamond for 2020 on the right-hand side of your screen. Even when we hit COVID, even when COVID hit us, perceptions of the future, optimism, did not go down among business leaders. And it's almost amazing to see how resilient their outlook was, that even in the midst of this, their expectations to the future stayed steady and actually went up a little bit. And there's your self-fulfilling prophecy right there, because they expected it, that it will get better. And then as you can see, the economy has improved, has gotten better. Now, another way to look at this is to just take a look at the average percentage of positive and negative responses to the total of 17 questions we asked. And as you can see, after the 2016 election, we got into a very nice positive gap between positive and negative answers to our questions. After COVID-19 in April of 2020, it flipped, where we had more negative than positive responses, but then it quickly flipped back again. to the more kind of natural state, typical state where we now have more positive responses than negative. And in fact, the responses again here, it's very similar to what we saw this same time last year. So we've got business leaders who are feeling pretty good and they're very resilient. We asked them on the survey, what comes to mind, just as an open-ended question, when you think about the overall US economy? And the way you use these word clouds is the bigger the word, the more it was mentioned, the more frequently it was mentioned. So the most recent, our survey was in October. We're going to do this again at the beginning of January. But then obviously we had the election uncertainty, comments about recovery, but mostly uncertainty because of the election. When you get more specific, what do you think about, what comes to mind when you think about the Tennessee economy? Much more optimistic, much more about growth. There's still uncertainty, but you see words like growth and better and hopeful. And when you get even more specific, when you ask them about their specific firm and business, it's much more optimistic. They are optimistic about stable growth. There's still some uncertainty, but what you get is overall, the big picture, the economy, bad shape, but individually, our firm, we are okay and we're optimistic. So that's a good sign. We also ask what issues, challenges, or concerns are you dealing with right now? These were the top 4 that were mentioned in October. And obviously before the election, you've got political uncertainty, economic uncertainty, the staffing and rising healthcare costs. Those two are almost always near the top of our surveys. But what's interesting is when you compare these numbers to the survey right before this. So when you look at July, which is the blue bar, compared to October, which is the red bar, this is the percentage of people in our survey, business leaders, who mentioned that, yes, this is a problem I'm facing or dealing with. Going from July to October, we saw a decrease in economic uncertainty, which is good news, which is that they're feeling better. They're concerned less with the economy. They're concerned slightly less also with profitability compared to just in July. Now, there were also increases in concerns of staffing and rising healthcare costs. That, to see that there is an increase in number of people concerned with staffing and rising healthcare costs, you wouldn't think that's a good thing, but actually we would take that as a good sign, because that means that we're kind of getting back to a more normal state. Growth requires staffing, requires hiring people, which requires hiring and paying for their healthcare costs. And so as we see more and more business leaders shifting toward those types of concerns, that means that they're thinking about growing in the future. So we have come a long way, business leaders. This is the percentage. If you compare from April of this year to October of this year, percentage of responses, percentage of respondents who said business economic conditions in the US are good. It was at 3%. So only 3% said conditions were good in April. That went up to 15. So that's a decent increase. Economic conditions, more specifically in Tennessee, are good. Was at 3 in April. Now it's way up at 34. Economic conditions for your industry are good. We've now got 54% saying they're good versus 20% in April. Regulatory conditions, that's improving. Perceptions of that is improving also. And economic conditions for your firm and business. So now we've got 52% compared to 20%. So we've got business leaders who, even though we were hit with this COVID-19, immediately afterwards, obviously thought things were bad, but they remained confident. And we're now at a state where we're seeing significant improvements in their outlook, but there's still some room for improvement. Now, when you look on the consumer side, we see a same type of trend. After the 2016 election, so these were the results from our consumer surveys that we do 4 times a year, we saw a nice, healthy increase in overall outlook after the 2016 election. When COVID hit at the beginning of the year, we did our survey in March. I don't think it had really hit consumers yet, what was happening and the full impact of it. So it went down, but not by much. But then when we did it in June, middle of the summer, we saw consumers were really noticing that things were pretty bad. But again, it's coming back up. So consumers in Tennessee, we're in that V-shaped recovery in terms of perception and attitude. And again, if you take a look at those green diamonds, that would indicate that not just business leaders, but consumers remained very hopeful. That even in the middle of this COVID-19, all during this year, their outlook for the future stayed strong and actually improved. So, we live in a state where we got business leaders who are feeling good, feeling optimistic, and consumers who are also feeling optimistic. And again, if you want to look at it, the percentage of positive versus negative responses after the 2016 election, we see a nice positive gap, more positive responses than negative. After COVID-19 in June of 20, that flipped a little bit more negative, but now it's flipped back again to the more normal state where we see in Tennessee more positive than negative responses to our survey questions. If you're interested in outlook across the state, we also measure what region of the state they live in. And Middle Tennessee, I will tell you, we used to do telephone surveys. We started way back in 2000. So we've been doing these for about 20 years. And we recently switched to doing the online surveys. But even back then, consumers in Middle Tennessee have always been more optimistic, always been more hopeful, more upbeat, more positive outlook on the economy than our consumers in the other two regions of the state. It's kind of a horse race each time between West Tennessee and East Tennessee to see who's going to come in second. In this case, we've got West Tennessee maybe slightly a little bit more optimistic and hopeful than East Tennessee. But in general, Middle Tennessee consumers are almost always the most optimistic and positive in terms of their outlook. If you want to compare Tennessee consumers to the consumers across the country as a whole, what we did was the most recent consumer survey was in September, and we're going to do it again in December. But if we take a look at the numbers from September compared to the Conference Board, if you're familiar with the Conference Board, they do their nationwide measures of consumer confidence. We're fairly similar to the rest of the country when it comes to current perceptions of the economy. But in general, Tennessee consumers are much more optimistic. In terms of 6 months from now, will business conditions be better? We're more optimistic. Will they be worse? We're less pessimistic. In terms of the future of jobs, we're pretty similar in terms of outlook and perception of the current situation with jobs. But when it comes to the future of jobs and the job openings, we're much more optimistic in Tennessee and we're less pessimistic. But the main one that I wanted to highlight, I've got circled in red here. When you talk about consumers' personal financial situation, now for those in manufacturing, this will be key because as a consumer, I may think the economy as a whole is doing bad, but if I'm doing very well, I have money to spend, and that will then determine and influence my own purchase decisions. So what you see is that consumers in Tennessee are much more, significantly more upbeat and optimistic about their own personal financial situation. Across the country as a whole, only 13% think their financial situation is going to get better in the next year. Over a third in Tennessee say they're going to get better. And we are much less pessimistic in terms of the percent who think their financial situation is going to get worse. So that would be the good news for manufacturing, that consumers personally feel that they're going to their situation is going to improve and they will have money to spend. So in summary, you've got both Tennessee business leaders and consumers. They remain optimistic and hopeful throughout 2020. Perception of the economy, they have rebounded during 2020. And Tennessee consumers are more optimistic than consumers across the rest of the country as a whole, which is a good sign for everyone here in Tennessee. And so the key point then would be is if optimism guides their spending behaviors, both businesses and consumers, then the economy continued to improve. However, and I'll just leave it with the however, I don't have my crystal ball with me right now. It's not working. But until we know the final results of the election, until everything's gone through all the court processes, the Supreme Court and everything, we don't know what's going to happen, what new policies might come into effect that might negatively impact manufacturing, might negatively impact jobs, which would negatively impact consumers. So what we can tell you right now is that even though we went through this bad situation, business leaders and consumers, we have increased our outlook on the economy and we've remained optimistic. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And there's my contact information if you had any questions or wanted to get in touch.
Thank you, Dr. Grafe. Great presentation, always insightful, and great information for all of us to take and share and use as some insights, hopefully, to run businesses in 2021. The next part of our program I'm particularly excited about. It's dealing with the 2020 elections. I know most of us are ready to move on from that and have been for some time. But instead of hearing about political pieces of the elections, hopefully we'll provide you some information here from our next two speakers that will give you some insights to hopefully manage your business in the months to come. A little bit about our two speakers. Our first one I'll introduce is Adam Nikas. Adam's a lobbyist with Capital Resources, where he represents his clients' interest in manufacturing, energy, healthcare, criminal justice, and child welfare. Prior to his current role, Adam was the executive director of the Tennessee Republican Party. He and his wife have 2 kids, and they live in Nashville. And Adam will be up first. Our second speaker is Wes Robinson. Wes is the Senior Director of State Affairs for the American Chemistry Council's Southern Region, where he represents the chemistry industry before 14 Southern states. His nearly 10 years experience includes several statewide political campaigns, congressional and gubernatorial roles, and most recently in senior leadership at the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. And I will point out, Wes lives in Atlanta, Georgia. So, guys, I want to transition now to you. And for those in the audience, we're really going to focus on 2 categories here to frame our conversation today. Adam, I believe you're going to speak first. And really, our first category is surprises and learnings from the 2020 election cycle. And then really what's next? We still have races ongoing. We have a runoff in Georgia and still some outstanding decisions to be made about this presidential race also. So I'll turn it over to you, Adam.
Sure, Ryan, thanks so much. Good morning, good afternoon to those in East Tennessee. It's good to be with you all. Let me just start with a positive. And that is, I was thinking about when I voted during early voting, and I waited over an hour to vote, and just looking around and seeing people of all ages, of all backgrounds, waiting to vote. That's a positive I think we can all take away from this election cycle. I was looking at the numbers last night, and voter turnout in November is already on track to be the highest in our country in over a century. We're at about 65.4% turnout. That's projected or maybe reach 67% or 66.8%. To put that in perspective, the 1960 race between JFK and Richard Nixon was 63.8%. In the 1908 race between William Howard Taft and William Jennings Bryan was at 65.7. Now, obviously, in 1908, our eligible voter pool was much smaller than it is today. And even in 2008, the voter turnout nationwide was 61%. So we're probably going to be performing about at least 5 percentage points higher than was the election of President Obama. Here's the negative. As you all know, we're still a deeply divided nation. While President-elect Biden received the most votes ever in a presidential race, President Trump received the second most. And so that's just something to keep in mind. As I step back and look at the results of the elections, I think if you take away the fact that the Democrats won the presidency, which is a big deal, don't get me wrong, that is a big victory. I don't think it was as good of a night as Democrats were hoping for, particularly in Congress. I think coming up here in a few weeks, you're going to have the special election in Georgia. And I suspect Republicans will hang on to the Senate, which will have a lot of implications for a Biden presidency and what his policy agenda will look like moving forward.
Great. Wes, do you want to take a stab at that one too?
Yeah, I think Adam's exactly right. I think it's really going to boil down to Georgia and see if the Republicans can maintain control of the Senate or if there'll be a flip there. As Brian mentioned, I do live in Atlanta, and what you're seeing in this race is unlike anything that I've ever seen. And done my fair share of political races, but both there's two Senate seats up for grabs in the same state here. They're really operating as a ticket, both on the Republican and the Democratic side, with operations, and that's really a 50-state effort. It's not just a Georgia effort. It's really a 50-state effort by both parties that are looking to sway the outcome of this election. Already, even since November 6th, which is when Senator Perdue was unable to clinch an outright victory, and it was determined he'd head to a runoff. Already, there's been $125 million spent just in the last couple of weeks, and I think it's a very realistic number that it could go 300 plus, 400, almost $500 million just in a runoff between the November election and January 5th. So it's pretty remarkable what you're seeing here, and I've never seen anything quite like it, and that's my big takeaway from here locally.
Wes, I've got a follow up to that. You work in several southern states. What's the state legislature makeup kind of been? Have you started tracking that yet?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ryan, because heading into this election cycle, Democrats had targeted a number of states where they thought that it was not just in play, but they felt that it was a likely outcome. They'd be able to flip state legislative chambers, which in the South are unanimously Republican. They thought they might be able to flip both the House and Senate in North Carolina. They thought they might be able to flip the House in Georgia. They thought they might be able to flip the House in Texas. And none of that came to fruition. And it was a big loss for Democrats because where they needed to pick up several seats in each of those states, in most cases, they didn't pick up hardly any seats. And so I think it's indicative of some of the broader trends, whereas you saw many down ballot candidates outperform the president, especially in metro areas, which is where a lot of Republicans were most vulnerable in the three states that I mentioned. And so I think that was a really interesting outcome that we saw. But ultimately, the blue wave simply never happened, and Republicans have controlled the legislatures throughout the South, which in this year, being a census year, has an enormous implication with redistricting in each of those states.
No, and Adam, as you know, here in Tennessee, we've our numbers are going to stay very similar. Republicans will have a 73-26 majority, which is identical to last year in the House, and over in the Senate, Democrats pick up one seat. Adam is at a 26-7 majority that Republicans will maintain next year. So if you're keeping score at home, that's where we are heading into the next General Assembly in Tennessee. So moving on to I think what most will be interested in, and we'll start with you on this one, Wes. What are the expected impacts of this election on U.S. manufacturing as you've been able to discern so far?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it was really interesting seeing some of the uncertainty numbers from the last presenter. But, you know, we've got a team, a federal team, we've got state teams all throughout the country. And we've been working with both the Biden campaign and the Trump administration throughout this entire process, so that regardless of the outcome, we would be in a good position to move forward. But if you really had to boil it down to a handful of issues that would impact the manufacturing sector, I think there's really 5 or 6 that we'll probably see action on where our industry has to engage. Obviously, the issue of climate and environmental justice is one that is everyone is probably well aware of with what you're saying with the Biden campaign and some of the rhetoric that's coming out of the Democratic platform. I think regulatory restrictions will be a big piece, tax issues, infrastructure, any COVID stimulus bill, and then lastly, trade. And so when it comes to climate and environmental justice, I think the president-elect is going to be in an interesting position as he, I think he's worked to try to take more of a middle approach, but he's constantly hounded by folks more on the left to take broader action. And frankly, ensuring the availability and affordability of our shale resources will be paramount to our industry. Since 2010, we've seen our industry alone has seen $205 billion worth of investment, largely driven by the shale revolution. And so ensuring that resource is continues to be readily available for our industry will be a huge effort on our part. Regulatory restrictions, I think, is something that we're and a lot of other manufacturing sectors are going to have to be playing defense on, especially in the instance if the Republicans maintain control of the Senate, because what you'll see is a Biden administration take a lot of action through regulatory channels rather than through legislative channels. And so that's an area where we expect to be engaged. Tax issues. The Biden campaign has talked about rolling back tax cuts. We'll be working hard to make sure that those gains are protected. But there's a couple areas where we don't think we'll be playing strictly defense on. We think there's actually pretty good opportunity to move the ball forward for our industry and for manufacturing at large. And that would be really on infrastructure and trade. Biden is a big infrastructure guy. I think the devil will be in the details. He intrinsically ties infrastructure to climate issues. And so, as I said, the devils will be in the details in terms of exactly what that looks like. But we think there's definitely a path there for investments in infrastructure. And then on trade, trade's a huge piece for us as we have a ton of exports. About 10% of all U.S. exports are chemical products. And we think we have an opportunity here to chart a little bit different path than what we currently seen. That's very tariff heavy. It drives up costs and it really cuts into our competitive advantage. So we think we have an opportunity there to move away from that policy a little bit and have a little bit more certainty for our industry and lower costs moving away from tariffs.
Great. Thanks for that, Wes. Turn it over to you, Adam.
Sure. No, I think Wes touched on a lot of items. President Biden has said he sees himself more as a transitional president than a transformational president. And I think what we're going to see, as unpredictable as our current president can be at times, he did say when he entered office some of his priorities that he was going to accomplish via executive order, and he did. I think what you're going to see in the first few weeks of a Biden presidency is a lot of reversion back to the Obama era policies via executive order. And so I think that is something to expect. I think already seeing some of President-elect Biden's cabinet picks, Tony Blinken as Secretary of State, probably Janet Yellen at Treasury, is a further indication of that reversion back to Obama era policies on many of those topics. But I think the elephant in the room still, despite all these important issues, is the coronavirus. How are we as a nation going to respond to the coronavirus? It's been interesting, Ryan, sitting in on a lot of these conversations that you all have assembled with the state chamber, and those in manufacturing, those who are business owners, whether they work for larger businesses or smaller businesses, they want the coronavirus under control. They want to get back to business. They want to be at full capacity. And so it'll be interesting to see where do we go from here, and what's probably going to be a dark next couple of months, according to the medical experts. The good news is there are, I think, now 3 promising vaccines that are coming online with Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer. And so getting that distributed, that'll be a big national undertaking. And I think that will be welcome relief to all of us, regardless of what your political stripes are, that we can hopefully get this coronavirus under control once and for all.
Great. Thanks to both of you. And one last follow up. Assuming, Wes, that Republicans do hold the Senate, of course, all that's predicated on what happens in Georgia in early January. How does the president and the House and the Senate, how do they work together, and what do you guys project that dynamic to be like in the next Congress?
Well, that's a $1 million question, quite frankly. But if Biden, I think he fancies himself a congressional deal maker and certainly understands the legislative process, both in the House and certainly on the Senate. I think he's got a understated relationship with Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell was the only Republican that went to his son's funeral, and they've served in office for a long time together. Frankly, I think it's a little too early to tell if he indeed proves to play out to be that transitional president where he takes a more moderate approach, or if he is having to funnel attacks from the left side of the party. So I think it's too early to tell, but that'll be really a $1 billion question.
Ryan, I think the first thing to look for during this lame duck session of Congress is whether or not there is another stimulus or PPP deal that's provided. Biden has indicated that he would be open to a more limited package in this lame duck session. If they can't come to some compromise on that, I think that diminishes the hopes of finding compromise on things like an infrastructure spending bill. I think that's an area where there could be bipartisanship, but we'll just have to wait and see. But I think the coronavirus response, if there's cooperation on that, I think that's a start. That's a good indicator moving forward.
Excellent. And thank you both. I think we've had a great conversation here, hopefully insightful for everyone joining us here. And I think that's where we end. And Bradley, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you to both our panelists. The next and final roundtable discussion that we'll have is one that I'm fairly excited about, and this is really to talk a little bit about the operational challenges that manufacturers have had, during the pandemic. Perhaps what's been the most challenging, and also starting to think about kind of looking ahead. I want to touch on a few subjects with a number of our manufacturers, and we've got a great panel. And let me go ahead and introduce them, and then we will dive right into the questions and kind of turn it over. Let's see. Get my notes right. Amit Handa with Nissan North America. Thank you for joining us today. Amit's head of health and safety at Nissan North America U.S. operations, 15 plus years of accomplished career in leading and implementing safety programs focusing on zero harm and risk reduction. He's certified safety professional, certified professional agronomist, and a master's in industrial engineering and MBA from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Second on the panel, we will have Blake Markham with Nakian Tire. He's HR operations manager, and they are located in Dayton, Tennessee. Blake, thank you for joining us. And also we will have Bob Booker on with Denso. Bob is a senior manager of legal services and corporate compliance for Denso Manufacturing in Maryville. For many of you all who do not know, Denso is the world's largest supplier of automotive components and systems for most major automakers. Their Maryville site employs approximately 6,000 personnel. It's one of the largest sites in their global manufacturing network. Bob's also a former U.S. Army intelligence officer and University of Tennessee College of Law graduate, and holds boards positions for multiple East Tennessee organizations. Thank you all very much. So I'll kind of go to you first with our first question. 2021 has really been quite the year. I think it's an understatement. My wife was joking the other day that if she had a T-shirt, it would be a kind of a dumpster, maybe on fire or something like that. But can you all tell us a little bit about some of the changes that you all made to your overall operations due to the pandemic? Maybe, what was the most disruptive, really to your overall manufacturing operations? And right after that, we'll kind of dive right in. And Blake, you can handle it too, and then we'll go to Bob.
Thank you, Bradley. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to talk over here. So as everybody know, COVID came and there was no playbook. We have to build this plane while we were flying. The key thing we started with from day one, we established what we call task force with some key members from across the organization, because we have facilities here in Tennessee as well as in Mississippi and across the US, whether it's our parts distribution centers, which stock parts to deliver to all the dealers. They were not shut down even during the time when our plants were down. So we have to stay operational as well as ensuring everybody has a health and safety in front of them. We also did, how do we ensure that everybody is operating from the right and appropriate standardized guidance? So we established what we call a Safe Start playbook, addressing different aspects of managing business around COVID. As you all know, we try to help out with the community by producing a lot of face shields for our healthcare providers, as well as headbands produced in the plant when the plants were not running. So I'm very proud of that. We established some of the entry point parameters when we were starting back, coming up, bringing everybody back. We send out information to all our employees, how the workplace will be a little bit different, because our office employees has the opportunity to work from home, but we cannot build a car from home. So a lot of employees have to come to work, especially to our plants. So entry point requirements, we have to introduce temp check. We have a certain COVID related Q&A where people have to answer. We establish COVID exposure protocols. We establish an in-house call center system where individuals who are getting exposed outside work had to inform us, and we directed them to a near-site testing. We are spending quite a bit of money on testing, but that's helping out. So we have not an on-site testing, but a near-site testing. We require 100% face coverings, even in the admin offices. On the production floor also, you are required to wear eye protection along with the face coverings. We instituted several cleaning protocols, from a commonly touched surfaces, the tools and everything, created sanitizing stations. Communication was one of our biggest tools. We just hammered on an everyday basis different aspects around COVID, whether it was face covering, social distancing, cleaning, watching your symptoms, making people aware of either through videos. We use some of the internet available videos, whether it was Bill Nile or whatever. Then we produced quite a bit media in-house, and communication through memos and newsletters. So I'm sure I'm missing a few things, but it was just trying to establish everything, whatever we can, and keep it in front of our individuals so that they are informed the right way and they can practice health and faith while they are at work.
Thank you very much, Blake.
Yeah, not too much to add right there. Did a lot of the same things at Nokian that Nissan just mentioned there. First thing we did was did create the task force. So go through and start making all these guidelines. The biggest thing for us has really been the communication and kind of putting the ownership on the employees. And letting them know, obviously, if you're staying out of work, you're not going to be missing pay because of the extended FMLA. We took advantage of that and extended that to our employees. So if employees were experiencing symptoms, we worked with them, obviously helped facilitate testing and those type of things. A lot of the same guidelines that Nissan introduced, like he had mentioned earlier. So when employees come on site, temperature checks, Q&A involving symptoms and any possible exposure. We staggered our start times by manufacturing area to try to limit the amount of people flowing through the temperature screening at any given point, and allow us time to clean those in between shift starts. Also, we pretty much eliminated all in-person meetings that we could, and made those Zoom or team meetings, especially with visitors. We really try to limit any kind of visitors on site to prevent any kind of outside exposure. Mask use is something that we've implemented from the very beginning. Enhanced screening after returning from long breaks. So we've seen that's been our biggest exposure. So for example, when we shut down for 2 weeks in July, just as typical normal maintenance, employees, weren't at work for 2 weeks. So a lot of people took vacations and traveled to Florida and traveled to California and all these different places that at that time had a lot of uptick in cases. So what we started doing is 48 hours prior to returning on site, we started having employees answering the questionnaire, so that we could have kind of a foresight of what we could expect on the day we started back up operations. So we've seen that that's been pretty successful, and that's something we plan to do as we go in to this week. We have a Thanksgiving shutdown for a couple of days, kind of an extended weekend, and then into the winter shutdown over the next month. One thing, obviously, employees that could perform their job remotely, we encourage them to do that out of home offices and those type of things. If we even took it to a level on the sales side, which is not on the operational side in Dayton, located, throughout the U.S., Nashville, Colchester, Vermont, and some sales offices throughout the country. We've essentially implemented work from home going forward. So we're kind of removing that traditional brick and mortar. You have to come into the office Monday through Friday, and really started encouraging people just to work remotely moving forward. So that's some of the things that we've done. Like I said, not a lot different than probably what Nissan's done and probably what we want to hear from Denso, but
Thank you, Bob.
So Bradley, Amit and Blake have done a great job, and I don't have a lot to add, but one thing I'd like to point out is I think one of the reasons I don't have a lot to add is because of the great work that TCCI did in sharing information. And we joined several TCCI conference calls, and it was a great exchange of information. And I think that's helped us all a lot. We did learn from our operations in China and Japan, who were experiencing some of the issues prior to us experiencing them here. And also we work very closely with the local school system and government. That was very important, and because I think one of the things we all know is that there's likely been more community spread among our associates than there has been internal spread. So working with the community has been very important, and that's something that we continue to do at this time.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, let me shift gears a little bit with you all, and let's talk a little bit about the future. Manufacturing is complicated enough, and then whenever you all had a lot of requirements that the pandemic placed on your operations, that was significant. Moving forward, will a lot of these, are they permanently embedded with you all's operations, or what do you see, are there some of these that you may be able to pull back, and how will you determine that? And maybe Bob, I'll kind of start with you and we'll go back through.
One of our previous speakers said he didn't have his crystal ball with him today. So unfortunately I don't either, but I can tell you, like Blake and Amit talked about communications, we have ramped up our non-traditional communications a lot. I think that is something that we will continue to see in the future. That will forever change the way that we do business globally and here locally. Also, just working with our supply chain. Two of the biggest issues that we've had have been working with our supply chain to ensure that we were receiving supplies so that we could take care of our customers. And also on the staffing side, that continues to be a problem with manufacturers across the state. And I think we will continue to be aggressive and to be more thinking, pardon the pun, but looking outside the box, how that we can satisfy our staffing needs. I know here at Denso and just in Maryville, we have over 110 open positions currently, and that continues to be a challenge for us.
All right, Blake.
Yeah, just kind of echo what Bob said. A lot of our guidelines will be, working closely with local healthcare professionals, following CDC guidance. So we're not going to be overly aggressive and pull things back when it's not in the best interest of our workforce. So we'll be watching that very closely. But a couple of things I already mentioned that will probably be part of our workforce moving forward is the remote work for those that can do that, right? And another big one is virtual meetings. Prior to COVID, a lot of our meetings on site were in a traditional conference room. Everybody piles in there for, an hour doing those type of things. So I think those two would be the most impactful moving forward, and we'll just have to wait and see on the others how it impacts us.
Okay.
Yeah, same here, Bradley. I think crystal ball going to be the key word from today's meeting. I wish we had it. Yeah, we're going to monitor. I don't think so we are in a rush to change anything. I think these controls are helping us. Who knows what's next 10 months, 12 months, even after vaccine, how it's going to play out. So at this point, we're going to just wait and watch.
Well, I'm glad you did mention the vaccine. So kind of the next question that I do want to get to, I know a number of our manufacturers are already starting to think through that may be an opportunity to actually change some things if we do get back to normal. If a vaccine becomes readily available, we've already seen in Tennessee that, Tennessee will get a certain number of doses for it. It's going to go, to more at risk and healthcare workers. But as it does come, more available, do you all anticipate maybe, requiring employees to take a vaccine? And if kind of how do you all think about approaching that?
Yeah, I'll be curious to hear from the other speakers or anybody else. I mean, we are discussing, Bradley, honestly speaking, no discussion, because these things are developing just in the last 48 hours, 72 hours. So still a lot of discussion, but no decision one way or the other.
Yeah, I would repeat that. I think a lot of it still needs to be proven. How successful is the vaccine? Is it safe? Provided those things do check the box, it could be handled something similar to flu shots, right? We don't require every single person to get one, but those that feel comfortable getting one, we may take that route. But a lot of decisions on that still to come, and probably some more information that we need before we can make a good decision.
Yeah, and Bradley, I would agree. And this, we're really going into a world where there's a question of corporate decisions and personal decisions. And so we're trying to walk that fine line very carefully as well.
Yeah. Well, I know it's certainly going to be a hotter topic. I know even in the legislature, there has been legislation filed, which this issue has never come up before, but currently if an individual wants to refuse a vaccine, they have two reasons. It can be for health-related reasons or for a strongly held religious belief. And the legislation would add kind of a catch-all where if you consciously objected, that would not allow employers to do that. So I know that'll be a discussion this legislative session. I think we're really starting to wind down. I'm not for sure if there's anything else that you all would like to touch on for our folks here, but we do talk about a lot of things that looking back, is there anything you would have maybe done differently? And I guess with that said, Bob, I'll kind of go to you, and we'll go back through, and then we'll close out with everything that you've done. Any mistakes or something you do differently?
I'll say that we were very aggressive from the beginning, especially with a face mask. We also produced some face shields like Nissan did, and we do think that helped us a lot. We should have required those sooner. We were actually ahead of the CDC guidelines, but we do believe our aggressive actions helped us. And then again, the information sharing between companies, we think that benefited us a lot. And so I'd like to encourage TCCI to continue doing that, because it is very helpful to hear from the other companies about the actions they're taking and the issues that they're facing. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, hindsight's always 20/20, right? So if we knew this was coming, we would obviously probably been more aggressive from the onset, especially procuring PPE, because that became quite a challenge there in April timeframe. So that would have been something we probably would have done earlier, and probably just implemented the guidelines a little sooner and communicated those a little bit more upfront when we started those. Obviously now everyone's very familiar with them and the communication's going and they understand that. But having that earlier on probably would have prevented some anxiety when all this first started for the workforce.
Yeah, and same here for us. I think we could have done a little bit better job in fine-tuning communication around where people don't tune out. I think that the flooding of the communication was so much, and the line worker just sitting, okay, one video after another, and we're trying to make sure they get everything. I think that's, if I have to go back and try to redo it, I think we should have done a little bit better on that aspect.
Well, thank you all. Amit, Blake, Bob, we greatly appreciate you all's time. We're winding down. I do want to take one more second just to thank our sponsors again, TVA, Innovative Consulting Group, Toyota, Elliott Davis, Lee Company, Aetna, First American and Bridgestone. And with that said, you all please stay tuned. We will have other manufacturing topics that will come up, especially as the legislature really starts to ramp up. I know we are thinking about a number of those. Susie and Carolyn will have some of our TOSHA classes. I know are getting ramped back up for production. If there is ever anything, to Bob's point, that the chamber can do to help facilitate discussion with manufacturers or questions you all have, please let us know. We always look for good topics to talk about as well. So with that said, Susie, Carolyn, do you all have anything?
No, Bradley, this is Carolyn. I don't have anything, just a big thank you, like you said, to all of our sponsors. I just uploaded the program again in the chat box, which anybody's welcome to download as well. Thanks our sponsors, also list all of the speakers from all 3 sessions. And did want to highlight as well, I believe 2, if not all 3 of our last 3 speakers companies sat in on our Healthy Business certification, which we are still offering. So if anybody's interested in that, we'll be happy to send more info. But Bradley, thank you for all you've done. And thank you to all our speakers and everybody else. So I'll let you close it out. I think that might be it.
All right. Well, that's all I've got. Thank you all again. And we'll keep in touch with you. Thank you.